She had been writing menu cards for 40 minutes when he appeared in the doorway, and she did not look up. Not from rudeness, not from distraction, but from the particular ease of a woman who has learned to complete one task before beginning another, and who has spent 20 years in a house where her husband's appearances rarely required her immediate attention. His name was Alaric Wrenfield, Duke of Ravensmere, and he stood 6 feet tall in the doorway of the blue drawing room with the expression of a man who has just noticed something he cannot name, a wrongness in the air, a silence where there should have been sound, the kind of absence that has no visible shape, but that settles against the skin like cold water. His wife, Lady Sybil Wrenfield, sat at the writing desk with her pen moving steadily across the card in her hand. Her dark hair dressed for a morning at home, her shoulders straight, her face composed in the absorbed, pleasant expression she wore when the work was going well. She was 41 years old, and she was beautiful. And he had not looked at her. Truly looked. The way a man looks at something he fears losing, in longer than he could account for. The pen moved. The fire burned. The house was quiet around them both. And in that quiet, something Alaric could not yet name was already deciding itself without him. Partridge or pheasant, he said. Sybil set down one card and reached for the next. Whichever you prefer, my dear. I would prefer you to have a preference. Pheasant, then. Partridge is in better supply this season. We shall have pheasant. Her pen did not pause. She had made the decision, the actual decision. In the moment she said pheasant, knowing he would raise the practical objection, knowing the objection would land as if it were his own conclusion. He understood this now, standing in the doorway with the word pheasant still in the air between them. He had not understood it this morning at breakfast, or last Tuesday at dinner, or at any of the hundreds of mornings and dinners that had preceded them. He understood it now, because Imogen was betrothed, and there was a ball in 6 weeks, and Sybil was writing menu cards. And something about the sight of her pen, moving without hesitation, made the whole architecture of the last decade visible to him at once. Every decision about the household, the tenants, the lesser estates, the parish charities, the seating arrangements, the kitchen garden, the dairy accounts, every decision made correctly, efficiently, and with the appearance of deference to him that cost her nothing because she had already made the choice before she offered him the question. Sybil. She answered without looking up. Yes. You have not looked at me in I do not know how long. Her pen stopped, not from surprise, from the deliberate choice of a woman who gives things their proper attention. She set it down. She looked up. Her face was pleasant, composed. The expression she gave Mrs. Dalrymple when the linens arrived late, attentive, gracious, entirely untroubled. I look at you every day, Alaric. I looked at you this morning at breakfast. You looked at the toast rack. I was behind the toast rack. A pause. 4 seconds, perhaps 5. She held his gaze with the patience of someone who has learned that most silences resolve themselves if you do not rush them. What would you like me to say to that, my dear? It was not a question. The inflection was level, the tone warm, the warmth she would give a guest who had asked something slightly beyond the bounds of morning conversation. The endearment landed on him like a door closing from the inside. Nothing, he said. Continue with the menu. She replied simply, Thank you. She returned to the cards. He stood in the doorway another minute, watching his wife do the work of being his wife. With the fluency of a woman doing a job she has mastered so completely that the mastery itself has become invisible. To her, to him, to everyone in the house except perhaps in this moment, to Alaric himself. He left without saying anything further. The pen resumed its movement behind him. The betrothal breakfast was held the following morning in the east dining room, with Imogen flushed and bright at the head of the table, and young Viscount Hartsey seated beside her, looking rather as though he had been granted something he had not quite believed he would be granted. Sybil presided over the table with the warmth she brought to everything, attending to Imogen, drawing out Hartsey's quieter younger brother, keeping the conversation moving with the ease of long practice. Alaric sat at his end of the table and drank his coffee and watched her. He reached for the honey pot at the same moment she did. Their hands met on the handle, his over hers, 3 fingers against the back of her hand, neither of them having anticipated the other. She did not pull away. She looked down at the place where their hands joined on the handle of the pot, and her expression shifted into something he had not seen in years. Not warmth, not composure, but a quieter thing, more careful. Curiosity. As if she had just discovered that his hand was warm, and the discovery was mildly interesting to her. Then she lifted her eyes to his, held them for a moment, took the honey, returned to her toast. Alaric sat with his hands on the tablecloth and could not eat for 10 minutes. Hartsey was speaking about the Hertfordshire estate, and Imogen was laughing, and Sybil was spreading honey on her toast with the same attention she gave everything, even, precise, complete. And Alaric sat at the end of the table and understood that something had just happened that he had no language for, because the language would have required him to know, before this moment, what he had been looking at. Lady Cordelia Wrenfield cornered him in the corridor outside the breakfast room before the guests had finished their second cups. "A word," she said, and the tone was her mother's. The late Dowager Duchess had used the same tone when she intended to be obeyed. Alaric followed his sister into the small anteroom off the corridor and waited while she closed the door with the deliberateness of a woman who has rehearsed this conversation in her head for some time. "Your wife is gone," Cordelia said. He looked at her. "Sybil is in the morning room with the florist. I saw her cross the hall not 20 minutes ago." "She is in the morning room with the florist," Cordelia said, "and she has gone. There is a difference between being in a room and being present in it, Alaric. I have watched her for 3 years. She is gracious and she is capable, and she runs this house and she loves her daughters and she attends to everything required of her. She attends to you. She does not need you." He said nothing, not bitterness. Cordelia continued, "Not resentment. I want to be precise. I am not describing a woman who is angry with you. I am describing a woman who has arranged herself so thoroughly around your absence that she has become self-sufficient in a way that has nothing to do with you at all. The light she kept for you has gone out, Alaric. I do not think she noticed it happen. What do I do?" Cordelia looked at him for a long moment. "You're asking me 20 years too late," she said, "but the question still matters. That is the only mercy I can offer you this morning." She opened the door and went back to the breakfast room. Alaric stood in the anteroom for some time after she left. He walked through the house that afternoon with Cordelia's words arranged in his mind, like evidence at an inquest. Things he had not wanted to examine laid out in the necessary order. He found Sybil in the kitchen passage directing the undercook and 2 housemaids on the matter of the supper arrangements. Her voice clear and specific, her manner warm. The kind of warmth that makes people feel they are being attended to with particular care. The undercook nodded. The housemaids moved. Sybil thanked them by name. 20 minutes later, Alaric passed the morning room and heard laughter. Sybil and Imogen bent over the draft seating chart together, Imogen pointing at something and Sybil shaking her head and then laughing again at whatever Imogen said next. The sound of it stopped him in the corridor. It was a real laugh, unguarded, quick, and entirely her own. And he stood outside the door and listened to it and understood that it had nothing to do with him. An hour after that, he came around the corner near the library and nearly walked into a woman he did not recognize at first. A caller from the parish committee, as it turned out, who had arrived without appointment. Sybil was receiving her in the corridor with the same warmth she had given the undercook, the same warmth she had given Imogen over the seating chart. Identical in pitch, identical in quality. The caller left looking as though she had been given something precious. Alaric stood in the corridor outside the drawing room afterward and tried to remember the last time Sybil had said his name. Not my dear. Not the title. Not the formal address. His name. Alaric. He could not find the memory. He searched back through the autumn, through the summer, through the season before that. And the search produced nothing. Not because he was certain she had not said it, but because he had not been listening for it. And now that he was listening, the silence where it should have been was very loud. He canceled 2 parliamentary appointments the following Tuesday. His secretary received the instruction without comment, confirmed the cancellations in writing, and sent the appropriate letters to Westminster. Alaric did not explain his reasons to anyone. He was not certain, at the time, that he could have explained them. Only that something had shifted in the house, and he needed to be in it, rather than away from it, and that this was the first time in 20 years he had made such a calculation. Sybil saw the cancelled appointments on the household diary, where parliamentary dates were logged alongside estate business and family commitments. She was working through the morning accounts when she noticed them. 2 dates struck through in the secretary's hand. She paused over them for the length of a breath. Then she turned the page and continued with the accounts. He began appearing in rooms where he had not appeared before. Not intrusively. He did not interrupt or address her. He appeared in the doorway of the kitchen garden one morning while she was speaking with the head gardener about the winter beds, and stood at the far end of the path for a few minutes before turning back toward the house. He was at the end of the corridor on Thursday when she returned from the parish meeting, far enough away that she would have had to raise her voice to address him, close enough that they both knew he had been there. On Friday morning, she went to the library at her usual hour for coffee and found him already in the room. Not in her chair, not at her desk, but in the armchair by the north window, reading. He looked up when she entered. She nodded, went to her own chair, and opened her book. Neither of them spoke. He stayed for 40 minutes. She noticed all of it with the careful, wary attention of a woman who has learned not to assign meaning to things before the meaning has made itself clear. The seamstress arrived on Wednesday morning to pin the hem of Sybil's ball gown, and Sybil stood on the low platform in her dressing room in the half-finished silk while the woman worked around her feet in silence, pins between her teeth and a measuring tape over one shoulder. Sybil stood very still, as she always did for fittings, and looked at the middle distance and thought about the table arrangements for the supper. The door opened. She saw him in the mirror before she heard him. Alaric in the doorway of her dressing room, a room he had not entered in years, wearing the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere and is not certain he was meant to arrive there. The seamstress looked up briefly, assessed the situation with professional discretion, and returned to her pins. Sybil held his gaze in the glass. 4 seconds. 5. He could not speak. Not with the seamstress there, not in this room. Not with whatever he had come to say still unformed in him. He looked at his wife's reflection in the mirror, and her reflection looked back at him, and then he crossed to the chair by the window and sat down. He did not read. He did not speak. He sat in the chair by the window and watched her in the mirror between pins, the seamstress moving around her feet, Sybil's hands still at her sides, the silk catching the morning light. 40 minutes passed. The seamstress finished, gathered her things, and left with a small curtsy. Sybil stepped down from the platform. "Thank you for staying," she said. She was looking at the gown, smoothing the silk at her hip, not at him. "I did not know I was supposed to," Alaric said. "You were not." She looked up then, briefly, directly. "That is why I am thanking you." He had no answer for that. She moved past him toward the wardrobe, and he sat in the chair by the window for another minute before leaving. The following morning at breakfast, Hester was reading at the table, a habit Sybil had given up correcting, and Imogen was buttering her toast and talking about nothing in particular, when she paused and said, to no one specifically, to the air above the marmalade, "Heartsey said it to me 3 times yesterday. I used to think it was because we were new, but I have been thinking about it, and I believe he simply says it. When he means it, he says it. It does not seem to cost him anything." Sybil poured her tea without looking up from the pot. Alaric, across the table, set down his cup. He did not pick it up again. Imogen moved on to the matter of the flowers for the hall, and Hester turned a page, and the breakfast continued around the 2 of them. Alaric sitting very still with his hands flat on the table beside the cup he had set down. Sybil pouring her tea with the steady hand of a woman who has learned to be very careful about what her hands reveal. Cordelia found Alaric in the estate office that same afternoon, going through a set of land surveys with the concentration of a man who is not actually looking at the land surveys. She sat down across from him without being invited and waited until he set the papers aside. "She has not looked at you as a husband in years," Cordelia said. "You know this now. You have known it since the breakfast last week, or perhaps since before that, and you have simply admitted it since then. The question is not what has happened. The question is what you are prepared to do." "Tell me what to do," Alaric said. "I cannot tell you what to do. I can tell you that the ball is in 3 weeks, and that after the ball the house will empty, and Imogen will go to Hertfordshire with Heartsey's family, and Hester will go back to school, and you and Sybil will be alone in this house together for the first time in I cannot count how many years. I can tell you that window is either a door or a wall, and the difference is entirely what you do with these 3 weeks. And if she has made her peace." Cordelia was quiet for a moment. "Then you will have to decide whether a woman's peace is something you have the right to disturb," she said. "And you will have to decide whether you are disturbing it for her sake or for yours. Those are not the same thing, Alaric. They have never been the same thing. The difficulty is that they feel identical from the inside." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and left him with the land surveys. He was returning from the stables at dusk 2 days later when he saw them, Sybil and Cordelia on the garden bench near the yew hedge, sitting close together in the failing light. He stopped. Neither of them had seen him. He should have stepped forward, announced himself, continued toward the house. He did not step forward. Sybil was speaking, her voice carried in the still evening air, not loudly but clearly, the way voices carry in gardens when the wind has gone. "The strangest thing," she said. "I woke last Tuesday and understood the waiting was gone. Not gradually. I simply woke and it was gone, the way a fever breaks. You do not notice the hour it breaks. You only notice that the room is cool and you are lucid, and the thing that was consuming you has stopped consuming you. I lay there for a while and waited to feel the loss of it. I did not feel the loss. I felt clear. I feel clear. Cordelia said something too low for him to hear. I am not unhappy, Sybil continued. That is what unsettles me. I thought, when I imagined this, and I did imagine it, years ago, I thought it would feel like grief. It feels like the end of grief. I think I have become very peaceful, Cordelia. I think that is the most dangerous thing that could have happened to us. Alaric stood behind the yew hedge and did not breathe. He waited until he was certain they would not see him. Then he walked around the hedge, along the kitchen path, and back to the house. That evening, he sat at his desk and wrote a letter to his secretary, canceling not one appointment, not two, but the entire following month of parliamentary commitments. Every engagement, every session. He sealed the letter and left it on the desk to be sent in the morning. He did not sleep well. Sybil noticed the cancellations on the third day. She was working through the household diary, and she stopped at the page and looked at the column of struck-through dates, the whole month, every date. And she sat with her hand, flat on the open page for a long moment. Then she turned to the next page and continued with the morning accounts. And she did not say anything about it to anyone. The library was quiet the following Tuesday afternoon when Sybil came in at her usual hour. She went to the window, as she sometimes did when the accounts had been heavy, and she needed a few minutes of sky before returning to the desk. She stood with her back to the room, her hands loose at her sides, looking out at the garden where the last of the autumn color was holding on in the beeches. She heard the door. She knew from the particular sound of his step that it was Alaric. She had known his step for 20 years, the way you know the sound of a specific door in a house you have lived in long enough. She did not turn. He entered. She heard him cross the room and stop. Closer than she had expected, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back, the displacement of the air, the particular quality of a person standing still very near you. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He simply stood there and waited. She turned her head, slowly over her shoulder. He was perhaps a foot behind her, his eyes on the side of her face, and his expression was not the composed expression he wore in public or at table. It was something stripped of its usual management, something that had the quality of a question asked without words. He raised one hand. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the pad of his index finger against the back of her wrist. Just that. Just the single point of contact where her pulse moved under the skin, and held it there. No grip, no stroke, just his fingertip and her wrist, and the steady beat of her blood against the thin pressure of his touch. He stood there and counted. She could see him counting, the slight stillness of his breath, the way his eyes did not move from her face. 12 beats. She counted with him, without meaning to. He removed his hand. He left without speaking. That evening at dinner, Cordelia was seated 3 places from Sybil's right, and Alaric was at his end of the table, and the conversation moved through the usual channels. The ball preparations, the weather, something Hester had said at lessons that afternoon. Then Sybil said, addressing a question about the East Wing corridor, "Alaric, do you recall whether the lamp brackets there are fixed or freestanding?" Cordelia set down her glass. Alaric went very still. He had heard her say the title for years, the formal address, the correct term. He had not heard his name in her mouth in 8 years. and the sound of it now was so precisely and unexpectedly itself that for a moment he could not locate the answer to the question. "Fixed," he said, after a pause that lasted a beat too long. "Fixed since the renovation." "Thank you," Sybil said, and returned to her plate. Cordelia picked up her glass again and looked at neither of them. In the days before the ball, Alaric began bringing Sybil coffee at 9 each morning. He did not explain this. He simply appeared at the library door with 2 cups, set one on the table near her chair, and took the other to the window or to the armchair by the north wall. She accepted the cup without asking why. She did not ask on the first morning, or the third, or the 6th. He had found the note 3 weeks earlier, a slip of paper pressed flat between 2 pages of her household accounts ledger in her hand. Undated but old, from the color of it. "He never notices I take coffee at 9. He had read it twice, replaced it carefully between the same pages, closed the ledger, and sat at the desk for a long time without moving. He had been noting every morning since what time it was when she went to the library. The night of the betrothal ball, Ravensmere Hall was full from the entrance to the terrace. Sybil received guests at Alaric's side in the entrance hall for an hour. Names, faces, the appropriate words for each, the particular warmth reserved for those who mattered to Imogen. And she performed it all, with the completeness of a woman for whom social grace is not performance, but second nature. Something worn so long, it has become skin. Alaric stood beside her and watched her work the room, and understood, in a way he had not understood before this evening, that her grace had never depended on him. It was entirely hers. She had developed it in the years of his parliamentary absences, in the years of managing the estates and the charities and the daughters and the household, in the years of being the center of a life that he had been peripheral to while believing himself essential. She would have been exactly this person if he had stood beside her every day of the 20 years, and she would have been exactly this person if he had not been there at all. He watched her dance twice, once with an elderly earl who was clearly delighted by her attention, and once with a young cousin of Heartsease who was clearly terrified by it. And he stood at the edge of the room with a glass he did not drink from, and watched her move through the light. And the watching had the quality of something irreversible. Near midnight, he saw Imogen slip through the crowd to her mother's side and lean in close, her mouth near Sybil's ear, and whatever she said made Sybil close her eyes, 1 second, no more, and press her lips together, and then compose herself and turn back to the room. The only unguarded moment of the entire evening. It was over before anyone else could have seen it. The last guests were seen to their carriages at midnight. The house grew quiet in the particular way that large houses grow quiet after many people have left them. Not silence, exactly, but the absence of presence, the rooms returning to themselves. Sybil crossed the entrance hall toward the stairs. Alaric followed. She was sitting at the vanity removing her earrings when he closed the bedroom door. She did not turn. He stood against the door and watched her reflection in the mirror, the candlelight on the silk of the gown, her hands at her ears, her face composed and tired in the way that only shows after a long performance is over. "Sybil," he said. She answered quietly, "Yes. I was behind the hedge 3 weeks ago, in the garden at dusk. I heard everything you said to Cordelia. You said the waiting was gone." She set down the first earring in the porcelain dish. Her hands did not rush. She did not turn. "I wondered who was behind the hedge," she said. "I thought it was the gardener." "It was me? Then you heard everything." I heard the waiting was gone. She reached up and removed the second earring, set it in the dish beside the first, folded her hands in her lap. Her reflection in the mirror was perfectly composed, not cold, not hard, but settled, the way a room settles after the fire has been burning steadily for hours. I love you, Sybil. His voice had lost its usual architecture. The careful construction of a man who has spent 30 years choosing words that do exactly what he needs them to do. What came out now was simpler and more broken than that. I have loved you every day for 20 years. I did not say the word because I spend my public life saying words that do not mean what they sound like. I sat in the Lords, and I persuaded men with language. And I watched other men declare love at dinner tables the way they declared loyalty to the crown. Easily, theatrically, without cost. I decided that if the word came from my mouth, it would sound like another speech. I believed I was protecting what was real by keeping it out of my mouth. I believed the silence was a wall around something living. I was wrong. The silence was not a wall. It was a drought. I starved what I was trying to protect. I am sorry. Her reflection did not change. Thank you, she said. That is all. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned, slowly, fully, and looked at him directly across the length of the room. It was the first full look she had given him in longer than either of them could count. Her eyes were clear. Her face was composed. She looked at him the way she had looked at his hand on the honey pot, with the careful attention of someone examining something that has just become interesting. What would you like me to say, Alaric? The word does not restore 20 years. I do not need to forgive you. You were a man who believed his own doctrine. That is not a betrayal. That is a consequence. You built something, and it cost me. And you did not know the cost, because I did not tell you the cost, because I did not believe telling you would change what you were building. We are both responsible for the architecture. I will not pretend otherwise. Then tell me you still love me. I cannot tell you that tonight. She held his gaze and did not look away. I loved you for 11 years while I waited for the word. I spent 7 years learning to live without the saying of it. I spent 2 more learning to live without the needing. The woman who loved you through all of that is gone. Alaric. She did not die. She grew up. She became someone else. That woman is standing in front of you now. I have not asked her whether she loves you. She has not had time to know. Ask her. His voice was low. Not tonight. Tonight any answer I gave you would be false, either to please you or to punish you, and I am too tired for either habit. He crossed the room. He did not kneel. He stopped 3 feet from her chair. The distance between them was the length of a table, at which 2 people have sat 20 feet apart for 20 years, and looked at her. Take whatever time you need, he said. I will not speak first again. I do not know the man I was this morning. I do not want to be him again. She stood. She walked past him, close enough that the silk of her skirt brushed his hand where it hung at his side, and crossed to the dressing screen. She folded 1 panel back. Not open, not closed, the smallest aperture, enough that from where he stood, he could hear her. He sat on the edge of the bed in his evening coat and listened to the sound of pins coming out of her hair, one by one, each one set down in the porcelain dish on the other side of the screen. He counted them without meaning to. 15. When she came out in her nightdress, she did not speak. She crossed to her side of the bed, turned out the lamp, and lay down. The room was dark. Between them, 6 inches of mattress that might have been 6 miles. You stayed in the coat, she said. I did not want to presume the dressing room. Silence. The kind that is not empty, that has weight and temperature and the quality of two people breathing in the same darkness. Then her hand found his on top of the covers. She did not lace her fingers through his. Palm against palm, warm and deliberate. "Sleep," she said. "We will decide the rest tomorrow." 6 weeks after the ball, the library was bright with winter morning light when Sybil came in to find Alaric already there. 2 cups of coffee on the table, the one near her chair still steaming. She sat down, accepted the cup, and opened her book. He was in the armchair by the north window with his own cup and a sheaf of estate papers that he appeared to be reading. "You have been at Ravensmere for 6 weeks, she said, without looking up from the page. He answered evenly. "Yes. Parliament begins its new session in 10 days. I will not attend this session." She set down her book. "You will lose the seat, Alaric, possibly for good. The county has been patient, but 6 weeks of unexplained absence followed by missing an entire session. They will find another man." "I know." "Then you understand what you are doing." He met her gaze steadily. "Yes." She looked at him, clear and direct and steady, the way she looked at everything now. "I have an observation," she said. "Not an answer, only an observation. You have been in this house for 6 weeks, and you have not once asked me when I will decide. You have brought me coffee every morning. You have walked the east boundary twice. You sat with me through Hester's school meeting on Thursday, when you were not required to be there. And you have not, in 6 weeks, asked me a single time what any of it is building toward?" He said simply, "No. That is the first time in 20 years you have not needed something from me on a timetable." She picked up her cup, held it. "I do not know what to do with it yet, but I notice it. I am saying so because the new habit, if I am capable of forming it, is to notice things and say them, and to ask nothing from the noticing. Then I will only say, 'Thank you for telling me.' Don't." She shook her head. "That is still the old reflex. You do not need to respond to everything I say, Alaric. Some things are said to be said, not to be answered." He was quiet. She drank her coffee. "Tomorrow," she said after a while, "I would like to walk the east boundary, after breakfast. I have not walked it with anyone since Imogen was small." "After breakfast," he said. She returned to her page. "Yes." She picked up her book again. He returned to the estate papers. The fire burned between them, and neither of them spoke again for an hour. And the silence had a different quality than any silence they had shared before. Not the silence of two people avoiding something, but the silence of two people who have, for the moment, said exactly what needed to be said. She set down her cup, stood, crossed to his chair. He went very still, watching her, and took both his hands in hers. She lifted them, palms up, and studied them the way she studied the household accounts when something in the figures needed close attention. "You have rougher hands than I remember," she said. "I have been walking the boundaries and working in the stable yard. I did not know what else to do with the mornings." "I know." She looked at his hands, and then at his face. "I know you have been." Then she leaned down, his hand still held in hers, his palms still turned up, and kissed him once on the mouth. Deliberate, closed, long enough that he felt the count she was keeping, felt the care in it, felt that it was a thing she had decided to do before she did it. When she lifted her head, she set his hands down on the arms of his chair, one at a time, with the same attention she had given the studying of them. She returned to her own chair, picked up her book, did not look at him again that morning. He sat with his hands on the chair arms where she had placed them, and he did not move for 20 minutes. 3 months after the ball, On a night in late October when the fire in Sybil's bedroom had burned down to embers and the house was entirely quiet. She set down the book she had been reading and sat for a moment in the stillness. Then she rose, crossed to the connecting door between their rooms, a door that had been fitted with new hardware in September, at his request and without explanation, and opened it 6 inches. She returned to bed, turned out the lamp, lay down in the dark, and waited. After 4 minutes, she heard his door. Footsteps, unhurried, quiet. Her door widened. He crossed the room in the dark, and she felt the mattress shift as he sat on the edge of her bed, as he had sat on the edge of the bed the night of the ball, in his coat. "Stay," she said, "for as long as you like. The door is open now." She reached into the dark and found his hand. She turned it palm up in hers and pressed her lips to the center of his palm, unhurried and certain. Then she rested her forehead against his shoulder, and he did not move, and she did not move. And they stayed like that while the embers settled in the grate. The following evening in the library, the fire was burning well, and 2 cups sat on the same table, and Sybil was reading, and Alaric was in the chair across from hers, the chair that had been empty for 20 years while she sat here alone. And she set down her book. "I have an answer," she said. He held still. "I love you," she said. "Not the way I did at 21. That woman is gone, and I will not resurrect her for your comfort or mine. I love you the way I am now, which is conditional, which is measured, which is mine to give and mine to withdraw. And I will not pretend otherwise. I will not say the word 3 times a day. I will say it when it is true. Tonight it is true. Tomorrow I will tell you if it is true tomorrow. That is more than I hoped for," he said. "It is less than you wanted." His voice was quiet. "Yes. You will learn to live with less than you wanted," she said. "It is a skill. I have been practicing it for 20 years. I will teach you, if you like." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, the first in months, the kind that comes from somewhere below the careful management of expression. It changed his face entirely. "Teach me," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, drink your coffee before it goes cold." He picked up his cup. She picked up hers. The fire burned. 2 cups set down on the same table, not together, not synchronized. Close. Close enough. He had sat in her presence for 20 years without seeing her. He was being allowed now to sit in a different room, the same chairs, the same fire, the same house, with a different woman, each evening by invitation. He was learning to knock. She was learning to open the door. It was not the marriage they had had. It was not the marriage either of them had imagined at the beginning. It was smaller and more honest, and built on ground that had been cleared of everything that would not hold weight. It was, he was beginning to understand, the only kind of marriage that could last.